Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me today, it is our good friend, the host of the NFL on Fox podcast and burgeoning TV star, David Helman. Dave, how you doing, buddy?
I'm uncomfortable with that introduction, but I'm always thrilled to be on with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It is a fun time in the NFL calendar. Obviously, we got tons of draft talk to get into, but guess what? We had a bombshell today. So that is where we're going to start. We're going to talk about teams that we think have the most at stake in this draft a little bit later. We've been doing a lot of prospect-centric stuff. Nate and I have been going through the needs for every team, but I want to get into what's actually at stake for some of these teams in this year's draft. But before we dig into that, we have to talk about what happened with Steph Diggs and the Houston Texans earlier today. Stefon Diggs heading to Houston for a 2025 second-round pick. When you first saw this news come down, what was your initial reaction?
Well, let's do a little inside baseball. My first reaction is yes, I host the NFL on Fox podcast now, so I'm trying to get like you. And my first reaction was, hell yeah, we got content, baby. It's the off season. I don't have to think that hard about what we're going to talk about today. It's all, especially in the off season, it's amazing when that happens. But outside of that, my first reaction was, holy crap, he knew. He knew and look, Robert, I'm terminally online. I spend too much time on Twitter, but do you know where I'm going with this? Did you see what Stefon Diggs said on Tuesday? I think on Tuesday night.
Was it someone who said that Josh Allen didn't need Stefon Diggs, something along those lines, and then he responded with, "Are you sure?"
Yeah. He goes, "You sure about that?"
Speaking of terminally online, by the way, the fact that he saw somebody say that in real time—that's all you need to know about his habits.
Oh, it's incredible. So like I'm walking my dog, keeping up on Twitter, and I see that Stefon Diggs said that, and I don't know, 9 hours later, he's a Houston Texan. So I have to believe he knew something was up. But yeah, it feels like the culmination of 18 months worth of drama. The Bills tried really hard to tell us that there was no drama. But as I'm sure you're about to get into, the terms of the deal sure as hell make it seem like there was drama, because why else would they do it?
This feels like another sign from the Bills that it's time to turn the page, because even as they were dealing with the drama last offseason, you remember that Sean McDermott quote about being a little bit troubled about him not being there for OTAs. And even during the training camp, I remember talking to people there, and they really did try to downplay it, because I think they understood that they really had a window last year. Like, they were going to be a Super Bowl contender. They had all of the pieces that they had kind of acquired over the last couple of years. They had a shot, and Stefon Diggs was a necessary part of that. But if you look at where that team is right now, and if you look at sort of the reset that they hit with the guys they moved on from this offseason, the financial situation that they're in, it becomes less shocking to make a move like this, because if you're going to be in that reset, restart mode, those headaches are a little bit harder to justify and a little bit harder to talk yourself into. And I think that's exactly the place that the Buffalo Bills reached this spring.
And we can't say it's surprising, because again, going all the way back to the loss to Cincinnati in the 22-23 playoffs. Again, you downplay it all you want, but like when Stefon Diggs is barking at Josh Allen in a playoff game, it was a mental image that I don't think anybody ever completely got rid of. And so I can't say I'm surprised, but then at the same time, the Bills play in the AFC, and there's all this competition and all of these teams that they need to get past, that they have yet to get past. Obviously, the Chiefs, it speaks for itself. And I look at it and I'm like, okay. And I actually, before we started recording, I saw Brandon Beane, the Bills GM, said, he was like, "Are we a better team right now?" "No, we're not." And I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. You're not better. And how are you realistically going to get better? And I can't say I'm surprised, but it is a little surprising just to know that even with whatever headaches there are, that they willingly got worse, knowing how stiff the competition is in the AFC.
When you have a quarterback that you're paying, though, at some point on the journey, you're going to have to take your medicine. And that often applies to the pass catchers. We've seen this with a bunch of teams over the last few years. The Tyreek Hill trade needed to happen because of what the Chiefs are paying Patrick Mahomes, and they need to pump some of those resources back into other positions. The Bengals are going through this right now. If they eventually move on from T. Higgins, it's because if we're paying Joe $55 million a year and Jamar's going to make $35 million a year, at some point there has to be a concession. And Josh Allen is on one of those contracts. And when you're dealing with that sort of cap hit and that sort of not financial burden, but just financial reality year in and year out, eventually you're going to have to make some really tough decisions. And I think this falls in the camp of being a really tough decision.
And you're totally right. And I mean, on some level, I guess kudos to Brandon Beane for being willing to make a tough decision, and we'll see how it ages. But the key difference always is that the Chiefs, like Tyreek Hill is a great comparison, but the Chiefs had won a Super Bowl. The Chiefs had been in another Super Bowl. The Chiefs, even when they traded him, they're like, we're going to be in the AFC title game. We always are. And we'll just pivot and we'll find a way. The Bills have yet to get there. And so I feel like a sense of desperation of like, we have to do this. And it's going to take every, drop of sweat that we have. And now you are without, to this point, your best offensive playmaker. And like I said, maybe Brandon Beane is going to look like a genius when this works out. But I sympathize for Bills fans right now if they aren't convinced that that's going to be the case, at least not in 2024.
They're definitely going to take a step back. And I think now it's about figuring out how you're going to recoup players at that position in that position room. And we'll talk about the Bills here in a second when we get to some of these teams. I think the more notable thing is they took on $31 million in dead money to do this. Like, there's no savings involved with this. And that's all you need to know about how ready they were to move on from him. And it's funny because I was looking at two moves specifically to me outside after the purge happened before the first night of free agency, where they cut all those guys and you couldn't even fit them all in the same graphic. There were two moves to me that I did the Windhorse thing where I was like, why? Like, what does this tell us? The first was the way that they restructured Dawson Knox's contract, because I just assumed, looking at all their moves in succession, that they were going to try to clear the books for 2025. That's what they were trying to do. So they'd be back in a position where they could spend. The way that they reset Knox's contract is they saved $7 million on the 2024 cap, but now they can't move on from him after this season and save money. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because his contract had no guaranteed money left on it, or very little after this year. So they could have just moved on. Now they're paying him $14.5 million in 2025. I wonder why they would do that. And the other one was the Trey White move, making him a post-June 1st cut instead of just a normal cut. So instead of getting $6 million on the eve of free agency, they get $10 million on June 1st. And with both of those moves, I was like, that doesn't really compute based on some of the other things they've done and what they might want to do in 2025. Well, now we know they needed every dollar they possibly could get in financial flexibility, because his cap hit went from $27 million this year to $31 million after trading him. So now a lot of the other things they did over the past month or so make a little bit more sense to me, when at first glance they were a little bit confusing.
That's a really good point. And especially, like, I think thinking back to last season, Dalton Kincaid had such an encouraging rookie year. I think, not trying to take the guy's job away, but you saw people talking like, oh, well, maybe this is your new Dawson Knox, and that gives you the flexibility to move on from him in the future. So that is interesting that you commit to a guy long term when you have another potential number one tight end. And I love that point, because I mean, this is where it goes always. Like, you adjust to the news, you're like, damn, the Bills really wanted Stefon Diggs out of town. Then you start looking at how they can pivot from this, and getting some money from Tre'Davious White on June 1st all of a sudden could be really useful.
They
see how you
they have $4 million in cap space. Without that money, they wouldn't be able to pay their draft picks.
I'm sitting, you get, I mean, you do that, you go through the draft, you see who you got, you worry about all that stuff, and then you get a decent little windfall that you can use to potentially address something else. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with it, but there are still plenty of veterans out there. Whether, I know we're going to talk about the Bills, but whether it's adding in their secondary or whether it's doing something as obvious as signing another receiver, there are still useful receivers available right now. So yeah, I think it's interesting that they could use that money to pivot once the draft is over.
Let's talk about this from the Texans' perspective, because that was actually my first thought, because I wasn't surprised by this. You hear rumblings, and I talked to somebody earlier this week about it potentially happening. And so this wasn't shocking when I saw the move, but the fact that the Texans actually did this, my initial thought is, hell yeah. Like, let's ride, baby. If you're the Texans, you know that you have, I'll say, an elite quarterback on a rookie deal. I'll say a guy who I think already is probably like a top 8 player at the position. You are in the best possible position you possibly can be in. as an NFL franchise with a guy making, I don't know, what is it, $9 million against the cap this year that's going to give you top 8 quarterback play. And they've already shown us this is where they are in terms of mindset. The Danielle Hunter move, going out and spending the way that they did. And this is just the last piece. They are fucking going for it. And for them to be a year removed from a team nobody was talking about to now being a team that clearly wants to win the Super Bowl in 2025, I absolutely love that, even if I do think that there's some risk involved here.
I mean, there's absolutely risk, but I'm never going to kill you for taking a risk to go for it, man. Like I
Yes.
think especially when you talk about this, and it's good to be analytical and think about it intelligently. I get all of that, but like at the end of the day, we're here to have fun, and like you're trying to get butts in the seats, you're trying to get fans excited. So yeah, go for it, dude. Put your pedal down. Yeah, like I absolutely think CJ Stroud is a top 8, 10 quarterback right now. And when you factor in the contract, $8 million cap hit right now, the only quarterback that I think is definitively more valuable than CJ Stroud in the entire league is Patrick Mahomes. Like when you include money, like get CJ's ability combined with how cheap he is, it is an incredible situation the Texans are in. And I love them for having the moxie to go for it. You obviously never know how it's going to work out, but like what's the point of keeping the powder dry? We're here to have fun and try to win a championship, and that's clearly what they're doing. And even more so, what I think is really fun is when the season ended, I got some pushback for saying this, but I thought, there were multiple ways the Texans could have gone, because like you go back and look at all the guys they had that weren't guaranteed to come back. Like they had a lot of question marks. Like Dalton Schultz was a free agent. Jonathan Grenard was a free agent. You look at it and you're like, it's no given that this Texans team is as good or better than it was last year. And the Texans were like, to hell with that. We are absolutely going to be better than we were last year. And I just think that's really fun.
Yeah, I fully support this. If you know you have the guy and you know that this is your window, and there are limits to it, but if you look at a lot of the moves they've made, the most aggressive moves that they've made, it's really 2-year commitments. Danielle Hunter's literally a 2-year contract. This Diggs thing, there's no guaranteed money left after this year. So even if it doesn't work out, you're really not on the hook for anything other than that 2025 second round pick. And it's a 2025 second round pick that doesn't even belong to you. You got that from the trade that you made with the Vikings. So the only thing to me that is the risk involved here is he's 31. He did not play well or was not productive in the back half of last year. And there's opportunity cost. This team already has a lot of money committed in 2025. They are not going to have a ton of financial wiggle room heading into next season. So if you get to a place where you look at your roster after this year and think, we really needed X, not another wide receiver, that to me is the only real risk involved here, is that you've committed real resources potentially to a position that maybe there's going to be a moment where you thought, maybe we probably could have taken this in a slightly different direction.
But the offset to that is, as you just pointed out, I mean, let's say this spectacularly fails. They can cut him at no cost next year.
0.
Am I right? Am I right
Yep.
about that? Yeah.
0. No
So
guaranteed money left.
nothing. Like you and so what? You gave up a future 2 for a shot, a future 2 that, to your point, did not belong to them anyway, to try to supercharge your offense and lean into the strength of your team, which is this amazing quarterback. Like again, no idea if it'll work out. I mean, Aaron Rodgers played 4 snaps last year. Like you never know, but I'm never going to kill you for taking a calculated risk to really try to get over the hump. I think it's great.
I'm with you. There are examples of this, though, going the other way. Like this is the Julio Jones trade. He's a little bit younger and he doesn't have the same injury history that Julio had, but the Titans traded a 2 for Julio and he did absolutely nothing. He had played 10 games the year before, and I think that he had missed a lot more time than Diggs has over the years, but it's worth pointing out that there are other ways that this can go rather than, it's all right, it's going to just be lying straight up for the next however long in Houston.
At this point, I mean, half of the stuff that we spend our off season speculating about blows up famously in everybody's face. So yeah, like would that shock me? Yeah, and I mean, you do have to think about Stefon's downturn in production last year. I mean, I hate to be that guy, but how's he going to mix in that locker room? Because I mean, 2 teams have now moved on from Stefon Diggs when he was still a productive, good player.
And the
So, I
vibes
mean, that
were
is worth considering.
immaculate in Houston last year. They were
Exactly.
immaculate. So that there's some risk involved with that. But if I'm the Texans, I'm doing this every single time
I
because
also,
now is the
yeah.
time.
I think, young quarterback. I mean, the vibes were immaculate in Buffalo for years too. I mean, let's not act like it was always this dramatic situation. So I absolutely think Stefon Diggs is worth taking the shot on, at least for 1 year, if not a couple years. And yeah, I think the coolest thing about this league is, like, I mean, Houston and Cincinnati both, like, you can go from being the laughing stock of laughing stocks to this in a year and a half, 2 years. I mean, it's incredible. And
If you get the guy.
if you get the guy, yeah, and that's what we're going to get to in a minute. But that's what makes the draft so amazing, is that if your team does it correctly, you can go from being the team that it's like, oh, he should sit out and go into the next draft. Why would he want to go there? That's where dreams go to die. To like, holy shit, the Texans are going for a Super Bowl, and like in the span of a year, it's the best.
Last thing that something to keep in mind moving forward. I don't know what this means for Nico Collins. Are they still willing to pay Nico Collins? Are they going to pay him close to the top of the market deal if they're spending $18 million against the cap next year on Stefon Diggs? Nico Collins is a really good player and they have the money to make it work. But that's really the only lingering question I have about this with Houston, is what that means for him.
I do think that's probably a situation where it's okay to let that be a future problem, though. Like, again, like if Nico balls, I mean, you could cut Stefon Diggs to make money for Nico, or whatever. Just see how it goes, and you'll be able to figure it out when the time comes, one way or the other.
So this worked out very well, because one of the teams that you wanted to talk about, and the first team that we wanted to talk about, and who has the most at stake in this year's draft, was the Buffalo Bills. So even before this move happened, why were the Bills at top of mind for you in this exercise?
I think because the Bills are the current, or were even, I mean, before they traded Diggs, they were the best example of like the veteran cash strapped team, where like you can see the window closing and somebody's got to do everything they can to prop it back open. I mean, that's what I think the Bills were heading into this draft. And now, I mean, honestly, the Diggs thing, it doesn't change my mind, but it just makes it that much more drastic, because and you said it earlier, and I don't disagree, but the whole they're going to take a step back thing rubs me the wrong way if I am invested in the Buffalo Bills. Like, and again, the Chiefs did it with Tyreek, and that's fine when you've already won a championship and played for another one, and there's like very little doubt that you've got the best quarterback of this or maybe any generation. But the Bills haven't done it. They haven't even made it to the Super Bowl. So clearly, like, they've been short of where they want to be this entire time, and you have a quarterback that's capable of scoring 40 touchdowns in a season. Like, don't tell me we're going to take a step back when Josh Allen is in his prime and we know the stuff that he can do. Like, I don't want to waste a year, especially a guy who relies on his athleticism as much as Josh Allen. Do not tell me we're going to waste a year of that freakish ability taking a step back because Stefon Diggs had a bad attitude. Like, absolutely not. I would be very worried, borderline pissed off if I were a Bills fan.
The
That's just
only
me.
thing I would say, the only pushback I would give on that is I do think that the Bills situation, the Chiefs situation were different in one specific way outside of the trading a receiver. The Bills financially were pulling every single lever they
No,
could over the last couple of years. The amount of money they had to move around because of one, a window that they were trying to maximize, but two, swings and misses on contracts. The Von Miller deal and then the Diggs deal, I think, now falls under this category. They had spent so much cash over the last couple of years to squeeze everything they could out of that window in 2022 and 2023. Eventually, you just can't keep doing that year over year. And the Chiefs had never quite leveraged themselves to that degree, even as they were winning Super Bowls.
it is. You are right. I mean, there is no perfect 1-to-1, but it's just, I think there's so much more faith in a team and a front office when you're like, oh well, like the t-shirts are in my closet. I've got the memories. Like, Bills fans are just They desperately want those memories, and I
Their
can't.
memories are 13 seconds. That's what their memories are.
Ah, you didn't have to say it. You didn't
I'm
have to
just
say it.
saying. I mean, that's the reality for Bills fans right now.
Exactly. And so, but yeah, so the point being is, I mean, you have such a finite amount of resources to pull this off. And I mean, you kind of went through it earlier. Tre'Davious White's gone, Jordan Poyer's gone, Micah Hyde's gone, Mitch Morse is gone, Gabe Davis, Terrell Dodson. I mean, a lot of dudes
The
are off
Bills
of
as we know them are gone.
yeah. I mean, I mean, especially now that Stefon Diggs is gone. Like it, I mean, it's Josh Allen and a handful, and I mean, Von Miller's still hanging out there. Not that he really helped them do all that much last year. Uh, and so now it's time to replenish this roster. And I'm very intrigued by this draft, like by their picks, like by the way they are situated, because at the front of it, it's not very sexy. You know, they pick like 28th and 60th. Like, I mean, I don't blame you if you're not getting hyped for that, but they are loaded with stuff at the back end of this draft. Like, you know, they got you know, they gave up a third rounder for Rasul Douglas in the trade with Green Bay, but they got a fifth back. They have 2 fifths, 2 sixths, and I believe they have 2 fourths as well.
Yeah, they
So
got an extra comp pick in the from Tremaine Edmonds, which they thought was going to be a third and ended up being a fourth.
11 draft picks. And so you sit there and all of like it's intriguing. I can't say it's exciting because you got to see what they do. But all of a sudden now, like I've seen people on social media already talking about it. They have the ammo to go up a few spots for a wide receiver if they want one. They have the ammo. You know, they don't have a third round pick, but they very easily could. I mean, 2 fourths, 2 fifths, 2 sixths. If you love a guy in the third round, you have the ammo to get up there on day two. So or you could just hang in and make 11 picks. And if you are remotely good at, like, if Brandon Bean does a remotely good job, we saw the Rams do something similar last year. If you hit if 5 of 11 picks are ready-made contributors, couple starters, couple good spot players, etc., then this could work. And you've got Josh Allen making it all work. You've got Josh Allen pulling all the strings, making your offense instantly credible. There's a lot of things you can criticize Sean McDermott for. I think it flies under the radar what an incredible job he did last year from, like,
The last
I
2
don't
years, I would say.
yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
everything they dealt with in 2022 and how they kept this thing on the rails, I do think that
yeah.
he has done an underrated job as the head coach
With
there recently.
with the losses they had on defense last year, like somewhere around like the Philly game, they just turned into a really solid defense. And that was without half of their, like, star caliber defenders. So, you got Sean McDermott doing his thing on one side of the ball, Josh Allen making it all work. Now all you've got to do is have fun, but nail this draft. And I really do think, I mean, that is probably your best hope at keeping pace, at least this year. And like I said, I mean, if you think I'm being too doom and gloom, I think the Bills are in
I
solid
don't think
shape.
you
And
are at all. I
okay,
think that's exactly right. I mean, where did they get better? They didn't get better anywhere. So if these other teams in the AFC, like, look at what Houston is doing. If you're going to keep pace with a team like that, you need an influx of talent somewhere along the way. And I think there are a couple different teams we'll talk about that I feel kind of the same way about heading into this draft, but Buffalo's absolutely on that list. And some people are talking about them having ammo to move way up for a receiver. I don't
no,
think that's going to happen. If you think about everything else they've done over the last month, that does not compute with moving up and taking a huge splash swing to try to get one of those guys.
nor do I think they need to. I love how this works where, like, we spend 6 months. Anybody who is remotely aware of the draft knows that, like, wide receiver is the thing. It is the strength of this draft. And now everybody's like, well, the Bills have to get into the top 10. I'm like, no, they could probably hang out right where they are and get a really good wide receiver if they wanted to.
They can
So
move
I don't,
around though, like you mentioned. I think
no, for
that's a really
sure.
good point is with the fifths that they have, if they want to move up 3 spots or 5 spots, and they've shown a willingness to do that. They moved for Dalton Kincaid, they moved for Kyrie Elam, which is an entirely different story, but they have been aggressive in how they've moved up and down the draft.
And
But
I would absolutely expect, like, Brandon Beans, I doubt he's going to sit there with all 11 of his picks. And, like, I don't know if it'll be the first round, but I would imagine when you have 2 picks in 3 different rounds, he's going to use those to go up somewhere for someone. I feel very comfortable saying that.
You could say this about every team, but it really does feel particular to them. They need a home run draft because they've never had one.
Yeah,
Outside of the Josh Allen draft where they got Josh Allen, and I think there's been some misrepresentations about what the Bills' draft history looks like. There have been some big misses. There's no denying that. Elam, we mentioned, Boogie Basham, Cody Ford, guys taken in the first 2 rounds just did nothing for them. But I think the biggest issue for them is it's not that there have been too many misses, it's that there haven't been enough home runs. All
right.
the hits that they've had in the draft, even those guys have been marginal hits. Gabe Davis, Teron Johnson, Dawson Knox, Christian Benford, Spencer Brown, these guys that maybe are drafted a little bit later that turn into starters. And that's great, but they haven't had that class or even that many guys where you're drafting them outside the top 10 and they become Pro Bowl, all pro level players. They've never had a draft like the Rams draft last year. They've never found a Puka Nakua or an Amon-Ra St.
Right.
Brown or Nico Collins, guys like that. And somewhere along the way, if you're going to keep pace with the best teams in the league, you need one of those drafts and a couple of those players. And that just hasn't really happened for Brandon Beane during his tenure in Buffalo. It hasn't.
That's I was researching, reading up on my stuff to do this show with you, and I looked through the Bills draft history, and I was like, this isn't as bad as people would have you believe. But they also just again, they don't, other than Josh Allen, they don't have that draft pick who has become like foundational to what they do. I
Ed
guess
Oliver, I think, is the
Ed
only
Oliver,
argument,
yeah,
but
yeah,
Ed Oliver is the 9th overall pick, and Ed Oliver is a good player. Ed Oliver
right.
isn't. If you look at the defensive tackle history over the last 5-6 years in the NFL, a lot of the guys taken in the first round have turned into more impactful players than Ed Oliver. Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, Quinnen Williams, a lot of those guys to me are in a tier above him, even if he is a good player.
I'm sorry, Bills fans. I hate to bring up the Chiefs as often as I do, but where is your Creed Humphrey? Where is your Trent McDuffie? Like you need to draft and develop that caliber of a player who, like, from day one is one of the better players on your team. And yeah, like the Bills draft history is, I would call it solid, but yeah, like they need those home run players. And if this is going to be the year that you're going to win a Super Bowl or get to a Super Bowl, then congrats. I think it has to happen with these picks right here.
Like the AJ Epinesa thing. He was a second-round pick. He didn't do much over the first couple of years. He has the best season of his career last year. He signs back on a modest deal. You need more than that. We
Mhm.
need a little bit more than we're getting out of the AJ Epinesa production and similar sorts of guys and similar sorts of returns over the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm 100% with you that I think they have a lot at stake, even if they're not one of the first couple teams that would come to mind.